So today we're going to do something a little bit different because someone requested this in my Discord as a video, and that is how to play against different team comps. Now, I might be doing more videos like this in the future if you guys like it, and if, I want to go into a bit more specifics, but today we're just going to focus on the extreme, and this is really going to be, I think, maybe somewhat helpful for some of your ranked games here as we go through this, because we're going to talk about how to play against your opponent's team comp if they have no smokes, if they have no duelists, if they have no initiators, and if they have no sentinels. What should you be trying to abuse with the fact that they don't have that balanced team comp? And so let's first start off by talking about what you should do if your opponent doesn't have any smokes. Now, obviously, in Valorant, there are other agents that can supplement no smokes, whether it be Cypher Cages, Jet Smokes, Neon Wall, Phoenix Wall, Sage Wall maybe even as well could fit into that. So there are some other agents that might provide some amount of cover, but let's just think about it in terms of no smokes because it is going to make a big difference overall in comparison to those other agents that I just mentioned. Most notably that, with those other agents, once you use that ability once, you're not getting that smoke back, right? Once it's been used once, that is kind of it for the Jet Smokes or Phoenix Wall or Neon Wall or whatever, right? So if you can stop them after that first use, well, then they are going to have no smokes overall. So with that in mind, let's talk about what we should abuse. And I'm going to just use an example here on Ascent, right? And let's take a look at this Ascent B site for a good example of this. So your opponent has no smokes, right? So let's say they go for this B exec coming down on B, and obviously normally you would smoke off these two areas here, but obviously in this instance you don't have any smokes, so you're not going to be able to do that. And we have to think about, okay, if a team doesn't have any smokes whatsoever, what are they going to do? How are they going to try and get onto the site? Well, they're probably going to try and just automatically use the cover that the map provides them, right? So if we take a look at this B site, for instance, we can pretty much rule out some things that they probably are less likely to do. And that is they are less likely to do this, right? They are less likely to come down onto the site and particularly cross down the stairs as well, because coming down here onto the site means that you're probably going to have to run past the vision of these people here, which won't be blocked off, of course. And then if you want to come down the stairs here as well to attack onto this B site, you're going to then have to come into the position of people down here and, run the risk of running into them. Often, people rotating back here to potentially take that fight, and that won't be a great fight for them either. So you can think about things like this, like, okay, where is the cover on the map? Where would it make sense? If I was playing with no smokes, right, where would I want to go? And if you're coming onto this B site as the attackers with no smokes, you're probably going to want to make a dash for it down here, down towards the lane, so that you can get the cover from this wall, right, and people back here and people back here can't see you. You're probably going to make a mad dash for areas like this because that's where the cover is, right? And so that just makes the most sense. That's how you're going to get onto site. All of it makes sense. So you can use that to your advantage, knowing that, well, that's where they're likely to go. There's a very common, like, for instance, if you got a Killjoy, there's a very common, Killjoy setup with the alarm bot and 2 nanoswarms down here. Maybe in a game versus, no controllers, you're more likely to use this setup as a Killjoy, or you're just more, in general, inclined to defend this area of lane because that's where the attackers are most likely going to go, if they don't have those smokes. And so you should be thinking about this, well, okay, where is the cover, right? If I was an attacker with no smokes, where am I going to try and get into that safe position? And just, set up your utility or try and defend that area maybe of sight a bit heavier than you would, otherwise. And also against no smokes, one thing you could do is just abuse the angles that would normally be smoked off, right? You often don't take those fights because in a normal game, they'll be smoked off all of the time. Areas like A Heaven here, for instance, on Haven, will be smoked off almost always anytime there is an A exec coming in. So you can use that angle, which is, not as common of an angle to fight, and it's also on a very different elevation, and, some of these sites will have different elevation points that get smoked off. Use that to your advantage, right? Like, it's a different elevation angle where, there isn't fights happening all the time because it's normally smoked off. Well, that now becomes a power position where, you can see pretty much all of the site, right? You can get cover very easily as well. This is a very strong position to hold as a defender if there is no smoke, right? And so you need to be thinking about in terms of, okay, this is a really strong angle if they can't smoke me off now. Use those angles to your advantage, use those positions to your advantage, because you're going to be able to punish your opponent, if they don't have smokes in something like A Heaven. And my final point here for when you're on the defensive side against no smokes is use an op. Oh my god, use an op. Ops don't like smoke, right? They don't like being put in that smoke and they get their line of sight blocked off. Well, if they don't have that, you are going to absolutely farm with an op, and you should be getting an op as often as you can. I don't care what rank you are. I don't care if you think, oh, I've never used an op. It's easy enough, and with no smokes, it's very, very easy because there's going to be some very long-range areas that they cannot do anything about you, right? Like even here, and again, let's take this just position in A heaven, right? With an op staring down here, they are going to have to hit an unbelievable shot, and you are probably going to have to miss a pretty easy shot to lose this fight against someone there when you've got an op and you can't be smoked off, and you know, you're looking straight at them. What are they gonna do, right? Just use an op, abuse the fact that they don't have those smokes, right? With no smokes, you're gonna have some longer range fights. Well, then use an op for those longer range fights where you can't be smoked off. Absolutely glorious. You'll be absolutely farming them. And so on the defensive side, buy an op. You should be aiming to buy an op. You know, if you've win pistol round 4, you should be aiming at least one person on your team is getting an op in that round, and then hopefully they are just carrying with that gun for the rest of the way and punishing your opponent for not having those smokes. When it comes to attacking against someone with no smokes, there isn't maybe as much potential here going on as there is on the defensive side. There are still some things you can do though, and one of them will be, of course, what is a smoke used for on the defensive side, right? Well, it's used for situations like this. Let's say we're coming down here on A main, we send this Prowler in, and we see that there's an opponent right here close on the right, right? Normally, what might happen is you put a smoke in there, and that allows this defender to, you know, go away, escape somewhere else, right? But of course, with no smokes, depending on exactly what's going on, again, they could use something like a Cypher Cage or whatnot. But, you know, let's say they don't have anything at all, they can't get out of there, right? You know that they have to pretty much stick within this area. There isn't really a great escape for them at this point, and so you can obviously just funnel your utility at them. You know, you can just destroy them with utility, come in, you know that they have to be there somewhat, and you can just take that kill, hopefully, you know, and then enter onto the site. So you should be trying to, again, against no smokes, they're not going to have that ability to reposition and create, you know, some confusion as to where they might be. You know, as soon as you spot someone in a spot at certain angles, you know, they might have to just literally stay in that kind of vicinity and area, and then obviously you can, you know, relay that to your team, and then hopefully just exploit them and, you know, abuse them with utility, go in there, and then absolutely destroy them. Moving on, let's talk about no Duelist. The first thing I want to point out with no Duelist is that I think you should be thinking about Reyna and Phoenix in a bit of a different way than you do the other 4, because the other 4 have essentially movement abilities, right? Or the ability to get deeper in onto the site than the other agents can, whereas Reyna and Phoenix can't quite do that, and they kind of play out in a bit of a different way, and it's kind of a slightly different role overall, I would say. And so I think when you're playing against Reyna and Phoenix, see them maybe as more of initiators overall rather than duelists, even though, you know, I know they're technically labeled as duelists overall, but I think it's helpful for this exercise to think of them in that way. But with that in mind, let's focus first on the when you're attacking, right? And when you're attacking, honestly, I can't really think that there would be too much different than you could really do if they don't have a duelist. Maybe they'll be slightly less aggressive. You might be able to pick up some space for free, potentially, you know, that you otherwise might not, that might be a bit challenged more often. But, you know, that's no guarantee either. So when you're facing no duelist on defensive side, you know, I can't really give too much information because, you know, not that much will have changed. But on the defensive side, a lot will change, and we're on Icebox here because I just want to firstly talk about, you know, some of the map differences as well, because on certain maps, some of these things will apply, and on others, it won't apply so much. Smokes is kind of a universal one where that will apply somewhat everywhere, but when it comes to, you know, maps like Icebox, having no duelist is very much the meta, right? And it's the meta because you don't really need one, right? This kind of a choke pointless map, you can create the different, you know, angles of attack just from the map geometry itself, right? You can get onto different angles. Like, let's take this A site, right? You can have one person stood up here, you can have one person on the floor, you can have one person coming across the rope, you can have one person up here, right? You can create those different angles and avenues, and, you know, then you can come this way, you can come this way, you can create, you know, different angles of attack just from the map itself. So you don't necessarily need a duelist on maps like Icebox, but for some of them you definitely will feel it more so. So how do we exploit no duelist on the defensive side? Well, it's all about defending the choke points, because let's say you don't have that jet to, you know, dash in down here, right, and get deeper in onto the site. That means that all of your opponents are going to have to be funneled through this area at one point or another, right? And this is what you need to do. You need to defend those choke points as hard as you can. And really, your opponent, when playing with no duelist, should be going for more, you know, split attacks in general to avoid this problem. But if they aren't, and if they are just trying to, you know, run it down or whatever, You just need to defend, these choke points. You just need to defend that kind of space as much as you possibly can. You need to bombard them with utility to make sure they do not get through that point. And I'm going to show a clip here of Optic playing where they're running a no duelist comp on Ascent, and they are going to get destroyed, right? Going for a 5-man exec, trying to run in onto the site, and they're just going to get destroyed at the choke point, and that is what you need to do as well. Now, if your opponent is smart and knows what they're doing with no duelist, they will probably going for more split attacks in general, and so depending on the map and how those split attack works, you might want to focus on, okay, well, one person genuinely just holding spam here, with an Odin or something, right? And again, use the guns to your advantage, right? Like, again, one person here, with an Odin against no duelist just spamming this choke point, good luck to your opponent. Because what are they going to do? Right? What are they going to do? They don't have a way to get deeper in onto the site, right? You're just going to destroy them as soon as they try and enter in deeper in onto the site. So, use guns like the Odin to your advantage there, right? And then defend heavier, in this mid area to stop these kind of split attacks coming in. That is what you might want to do overall. And again, you should be punishing your opponent for not having that movement duelist who can get deeper in onto the site by basically just defending those choke points as much as you can. And now let's talk about playing against no initiators. And let's start on the defensive side. You're on the defense against a no initiator comp. What should you do? Well, first thing we need to kind of, highlight is that, again, some agents, who aren't technically classed as initiators can still do, part of the role of initiators, right? An agent like Yoru can still very much flash for their you've got a jet dashing in, let's say, right, who puts down a cloudburst here. A Yoru can still flash from down here for that jet to come out of the smoke, much like a breach or a sky would, right? So there are still parts of it that still could be filled by other agents potentially, but there are some things which are harder to do for the other agent classes, and one of them in particular is re-clearing spaces. Now, again, a raise boom bot can do this, but let's say that you have got into a nice little ratty angle. Let's say you've pushed all the way up C here, right? A no initiator comp isn't going to have a great way of knowing whether you're there, right? They are just going to have to swing this at some point, probably dry, and they might not even do that at all, right? They might just walk past you completely and not realize that you're there. And so you can take advantage of ratty angles because there isn't that re-clear potential, right? You can get into some pushed up areas and take some space from your opponent, right? And get into, angles that would cause your opponent's problems to potentially, re-clear without a prowler or a drone or, a skydog or something like that. If they don't have that to re-clear that area, that is going to be beneficial to you, and you can use these little ratty angles and things like that to your advantage, and your opponent isn't going to have a great way of dealing with it. Another thing, of course, as well, is those initiators have that rechargeable utility, right? Their E abilities all come back after 40 seconds. But for agents like Duelist and whatnot, that isn't the case. So, if you can stop your opponent's hit when they first go for all of that utility, they're trying to come in onto the site, let's say they've got Phoenix, right? Once this Phoenix wall is used, it's gone, right? Once those Phoenix flashes and the molly and whatever are used, then most likely, obviously the molly you can get back with 2 kills, but most likely it's gone for the round, right? That's it, you're gone. So if you can stop that initial hit as well, that is going to be very beneficial to you, because unlike the initiators who will eventually, regain that utility, they aren't ever getting it back. And so, you can essentially say, well, on the next time that they try and hit a site in this round, well, they're not going to have any utility. They're just going to have to come in dry. And so, when you see that initial hit against non-initiator comps, you need to be trying as much as you can to try and stop that initial hit, so that then when they have to come back, they don't have any utility left to spare. And the same is true when we're attacking into non-initiator comps as well. They aren't going to have a ton of early information, most likely, right? They aren't going to know exactly where you are without just, dry context swinging or, taking a fight on its own. So, you can use that to your advantage, knowing that, they are going to have to maybe, station someone here to, take this fight. And you can, try and isolate this player and try and kill them in that fight if you want, swing as a team and destroy them if you want, right? Things like that can happen, and so they are going to have to be, looking for those answers a bit more on their own. But then the second thing is true as well, right? That again, once they've used that utility, maybe, you've tried to, cause some pressure somewhere on the map. Once they've used that utility, right? Let's use Phoenix as our example again. Once he's used those flashes and that wall and whatever, he's not getting that back, right? So again, if you can cause some pressure and you can force your opponent to use that utility, well then, if you then go for a hit later on in the round, they're not going to have any of that rechargeable utility. And so you should be thinking of it really as, if we do have, let's say you have 2 initiators on your team and you're playing against 0, kind of the longer that round goes on, you eventually are going to have just more utility in general than your opponent, right? Because it's going to recharge for that KO knife or for that Sova dart, right? And so, you can use a Sova dart early in the round, then you can use one again after 40 seconds, and then maybe you can use a third one, right? That's 2 extra bits of utility that your opponent doesn't have access to. And so you should be thinking about in terms of that, like, the longer this round goes on as we attack, we literally just have more utility than the opponents. And then finally, let's talk about defending against no Sentinel comps. And I, again, aren't going to include Sage in this one because she kind of plays in a different role. I know she says Sentinel on her, but she's a very unique role that is quite removed from the other 3 Sentinels overall. She doesn't really replace those other Sentinels. She plays a different role in the game. So I'm not going to really be talking about Sage necessarily in this one, but we will talk about the other 3, and if they don't have a Chamber, Cypher, or Killjoy, what should you be doing? And I'm sure most of you can probably figure it out on the defense side. If they don't have any flank protection, flank, right? Just keep flanking them, right? Fast flank them. For instance, on a map like Haven, one thing you could do is, let's say your opponents are coming down towards this A site here, right? And they're trying to do this A exec down here. One thing that you can do is, if you push up through mid very early, and this is something a lot of pro teams will do now as well, is these aggressive mid pushes down B. You can get up in here and flank on this A site very, very quickly. And you can just keep doing this until your opponents are forced to not do that, right? And they might be forced to do that by playing very slow, right? And in which case, great, they're wasting their own time, right? You eventually, that time pressure is going to come onto them if they just feel like they have to wait for the first 30 seconds in a round. That's only an advantage for you. Or they're going to have to just leave one person there to potentially watch the flank. Again, great, right? And as soon as you've conditioned them to do that, that means when that site exec comes in, well, they're one player down than they normally would be, so that's good. Right, and so that's the way you should be thinking about this is, yeah, you probably will die, right? One round, there will be someone just sitting in spawn, you'll go for this flank and you'll die, and you'll be like, why the hell are they sitting there? But you shouldn't be frustrated by that, right? Because if you've conditioned them to do that, then that is good for you, because that means that it's going to be easier for your teammates to hold on to the site. And so don't worry about, like, yeah, it's going to be frustrating. You might even lose that round, right? But that's fine, because as soon as you've conditioned them to do that, that means that, other areas, that means that they've had to take away that person from the site exec. And then when we're attacking against no Sentinel comps as well, there's really 2 things, obviously, that we need to talk about. One is, of course, let's say we're attacking in onto this C site and we're against a Reyna and a Jett. What are they gonna do to stop you if you have a nice, coordinated attack where you use some utility and, you come in as a team? They're not gonna have that utility to stop you, right? There's just not gonna be that utility for them. So if you do see that, I mean, they could have other agents as well, right? Like something like a Brim or a Raze might have more to stop you, right? And so, think about which agents it is specifically, but for the most part, they aren't going to have as good of a site anchor perhaps as they would otherwise. And so, if you find that on one site, there isn't those agents that can stop you from just sending it to them, then go and send it at them, right? And so that's potentially one thing. But the other thing as well is late lurks, because of course, normally you'll see utility from the Sentinel players, right? Like to try and stop like some ratty stuff going on, whether it be, kind of a cipher trip or an alarm bot or whatever it is, and it's kind of some like late lurk position. Well, if they don't have that, do those late lurks, right? Late lurk through, for instance, on Haven, a good spot might be down B, right? Where you come up here towards B and there's no like alarm bot stopping you from coming down here. Maybe the spike's planted on A. Eventually you can just, walk all the way through here and probably win the round very easily. And so as soon as there is that, no Sentinel on the map, you can do stuff like that pretty consistently. And again, that isn't a great way. Unlike the kind of, stopping, someone might just stop you from flanking by just watching it the whole time. There really isn't that good of a way for the defenders. If the spike has been planted, they need to go and defuse it at some point. So, at some point, if you time this right, they can't just have someone watch you all the time. I mean, you could just keep doing this as long as you kind of find the right timings and whatever and understand those timings, that it might take a bit longer each time, but eventually they are going to have to go and defuse the spike. So, this will work pretty much all of the time if you get the timing right. And so hopefully that is a nice little breakdown to you that hopefully, gets you thinking about the maps and how you might be able to abuse some of these team comps that your opponents are foolishly running against you and, aren't being balanced, and how you might exploit them for it. If you did enjoy the video, let me know. And as I say, I might do more detailed breakdowns of this, right? Like I talked about certain agents like Sage not really fitting in. I could talk about, well, okay, what happens if you're playing against a Sage or without a Sage, right? In certain situations as well, and perhaps go into more depth, focusing on perhaps more specifics.